Hey everyone, today I have for you guys another dupe video. Today I'm going to be testing out a $10 dupe for the Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette. So the dupe that I'm going to be testing out today is the Bad Habit Royals palette. I was sent this by the company Hush. So you guys already saw me test out the Bad Habit Athena palette, which is a dupe for the Desert Dusk palette. I'll have a link to my video on that in the description box below. And where those had like almost the exact same packaging size, these are a little bit different. As you can see, the Royals palette is a lot longer than the Modern Renaissance palette. It is also just a tiny bit thinner. So here is what the inside of the palette looks like. These are all pretty much the same shades that are in the Modern Renaissance palette. They're just put in a little bit different of an order. So here are the palettes next to each other. As you can see, the Royals palette has a lot bigger pans. The net weight of the Royals palette is a little bit more than the Modern Renaissance palette. So on one of my eyes, I used the Modern Renaissance palette, and on the other, I used the Royals palette. Okay, so I've already primed and set my lids. I used my Tarte Shape Tape Concealer, and then I set them with my Coty Airspun powder. So I'm going to be applying the Modern Renaissance palette on my left eye and then the Royals palette on my right eye. So I'm first going to pick up the shade Golden Ochre from the Modern Renaissance palette, and I'm going to apply this with a Morphe E27 brush, and I'm just going to put this all throughout my crease. If you hear any weird sounds in the background, that is my husband watching football. So now I'm going to go into the Royals palette, and the matching shade is called Opulent or Opulent. The color is pretty much the same. The Royals shade though is just a little bit less pigmented. I'm probably gonna have to build this shade up just a little bit more. The colors are pretty much an exact match for each other, but once again, the Modern Renaissance side is just a little bit more pigmented. So next I'm gonna be going in with the shade Burnt Orange from the Modern Renaissance palette, and I'm gonna be using a Luxie 229 tapered blending brush, and I'm gonna apply this shade directly into my crease, but I'm gonna keep it a little bit lower. I want all of the colors to kind of fade into each other like an ombre effect. I'm going to take a clean 229 brush, and I'm going to pick up the shade Air from the Royals palette. It's not as pigmented, obviously, as the shade Burnt Orange. I mean, you can see that right away. It's a little bit more chalky. Definitely gonna have to build this one up to get the same pigmentation as the Modern Renaissance side. Next, I'm taking the shade Love Letter from the Modern Renaissance palette, and I'm gonna put this on my outer corner and then kind of blend it into my crease. So now I'm going to pick up the shade Majestic from the Royals palette on a clean brush and do the exact same thing. The shade definitely seems to be more pigmented than the shade Air. So I want to add a little bit more orange, so I'm going to go in with the shade Real Gar from the Modern Renaissance palette, and I'm going to put this right into my crease. The matching shade in the Royals palette is called Monarch. It's pretty pigmented on the brush. This shade definitely has around the same pigmentation as the shade Real Gar from the Modern Renaissance palette. What I'm noticing as I'm dipping into both of the palettes is that the Modern Renaissance palette has a lot more kickback than the Royals palette. These ones seem to be more firmly pressed. So I want to use as many colors as possible from both of the palettes. So I'm going to go ahead and go in with CYPRUS Umber. And with the clean brush, I'm going to go in with the shade Grand from the Royals palette. It's a little patchy, nothing crazy though. So for the lid, I'm going to take the shade Vermeer on the Modern Renaissance side and put this from my inner corner about halfway onto the lid. I'm just going to be using my fingers for both palettes. And in the Royals palette, the shade is called Queen. I think this shade from the Royals palette looks better than the Modern Renaissance. And then for the outer half, I think I'm gonna go in with Primavera, which is like a gold from the Modern Renaissance palette. And then in the Royals palette, it's called Crown. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of my makeup and I will be right back. Okay, so now that I have done most of my makeup, I'm gonna go ahead and start the lower lash line. I'm gonna use pretty much the same shades that I used in my crease. First starting out with Golden Ochre, and I'm just gonna smudge this right underneath my lower lash line. So since I don't have a duplicate of this brush, I'm going to be using a Sigma E21, which is the same kind of smudging brush, it's just a little bit smaller. And I'm going to pick up the shade Opulent, I don't know how to say that still. Then I'm going to be going in with the shade Burnt Orange from the Modern Renaissance palette with a flat definer brush, and I'm going to put the shade a little bit closer to my lash line. Then I'm going to do the same thing with the shade Air from the Royals palette. Then I'm going to apply a Love Letter. I'm going to try and press this one a little bit closer to the lash line. Now I'm doing the shade Majestic. Now I'm going to apply like the tiniest amount of CYPRUS Umber right up against my lower lash line. I'm not going to go all the way in, I'm only going to bring it about halfway. And picking up the shade Grand from the Royals palette, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. And now I'm just going to apply some mascara to my lower lashes. So this is the completed look. Honestly, you cannot even tell the difference between the two sides. The only real difference is the lid shades. Once again, it's like the same situation as with the Desert Dusk palette and then the Athena palette. There's not really a side that I like better than the other. I do kind of feel like the shades from the Royals palette, the lid shades, are a little bit more pigmented and more foiled looking than the shades from the Modern Renaissance palette. So the matte shades from the Royals palette are a little bit less pigmented than from the Modern Renaissance palette, but it is a $10 palette, whereas the Modern Renaissance is $42. So for saving that much money, it's definitely not a big deal at all. You just have to build them up a little bit more. I did find that there was a little bit less fallout with the Royals palette, and I think that's because the shades are a little bit more firmly pressed than in the Modern Renaissance palette. When you dip into the shades in the Modern Renaissance palette, you do get a lot of kickback. Overall, I say that the Royals palette is a super awesome dupe for the Modern Renaissance palette, especially if you aren't wanting to spend $42 on an eyeshadow palette. So I would definitely recommend trying out the Bad Habit Royals palette if you've been eyeing the Modern Renaissance palette but you haven't wanted to spend the money on it. This is definitely a great deal for $10. If you guys are wanting to check this palette out, I will have a link to it in my description box below. I know that a lot of the palettes from Shop Hush are out of stock, but I just checked and this one is in stock at the time that I'm filming this video, so hopefully you guys can get your hands on it. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I am planning on doing some more dupe videos in the future. As always, I would appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, make sure you check out my description box below because I have links to all of my other social media accounts as well as my website. And I'm also doing some giveaways right now, so there will be links to those as well if you want to enter. Make sure you click the bell next to the subscribe button so that you can receive notifications of when I post new videos. Thank you so much for watching.